We are suffering at the mercy of the pump. And there's pain for this because as for the American drivers, the U.S. gas prices are soaring to a record high. Now, although the United States barely uses Russian oil, but Russia's invasion of Ukraine is still a big factor in the reasoning for the gas prices skyrocketing, among other reasons. If you're confused, let's walk right through it. Um, so why is Russian oil affecting the U.S.? Most of Russia's oil goes to Europe and Asia, but the key here is to think about the oil supply globally rather than just the U.S. specifically. The commodities world is a heavily interconnected one, and oil is priced through a global market. So what happens in one area of the world can affect another. The problem at hand is that Russia is one of the world's biggest oil suppliers. Now, back in December, for example, Russia had sent nearly 8 million barrels of oil and other petroleum products to global markets, including 5 million barrels of the crude oil that's used to make gasoline, among other items. And yes, it's true that very little of that Russian supply goes to the United States. Um, Back in December, the U.S. only received 90,000 barrels of crude oil, according to the most recent U.S. government statistics. Um, Back in 2021, by contrast, Europe got 60% of Russia's oil exports, and China received about 20. But remember that oil is bought and shipped around the world through a global commodities market. So in this sense, it doesn't really matter who specifically is getting crunched by the loss of Russian oil, because the lower supply affects those global prices no matter the fucking cost. And as we know from Econ 101, when there's less supply of an item in demand, prices will rise. For example, if Europe buys less Russian oil, it would have to replace it with oil from somewhere else, and perhaps from the powerful Saudi Arabia led organization of the petroleum exporting countries. That increase in demand for the OPEC oil will send its crude prices higher, and guess who else buys hundreds of millions of barrels of OPEC oil? You guessed it, the United fucking States. Um, now, why is there less Russian supply anyway? At first, the West, including the U.S., exempted Russia oil and natural gas from sanctions that they levied. Now, the Biden administration had reversed course on that on Tuesday, banning Russian oil and other fuel imports to the U.S., while the UK said that it will phase out Russian oil imports by the end of the year. The European Union is in a tougher spot on this because they're far more dependent on the Russian oil. The initial lack of formal bans didn't really matter in terms of prices anyway, but there has been a de facto ban on Russian oil since the invasion began, with most of the country's supply sitting unsold. And that's because oil traders are incredibly nervous to touch the stuff, and there's a ton of uncertainty about buying Russian oil, whether it's about the ability to close deals given the sanctions on Russia's banking system, or finding tankers willing to go to Russian ports amid the shipping dangers in the war zone. Now, as a result, the main type of oil that Russia exports into Europe is being offered for sale at a major discount because nobody wants it. JP Morgan recently estimated more than 4 million barrels per day of Russian oil has been effectively sidelined. So investors are essentially pricing oil as if Russia's supply isn't available at all, and again, less supply equals a higher price. But why can't other countries pump out more? The good old COVID strikes again. Nobody wanted oil in general in the spring of 2020, when global stay-at-home orders meant nobody needed to gas up and get to the office. And with demand cratering, oil prices did too, even briefly trading at negative prices. In turn, OPEC Plus heavily cut the production to support prices, and they've kept production targets low since then. So only gradually adding back production, even when demand for oil and gas bounced back sooner than expected. Um, Guess who's part of OPEC Plus? Russia. So yeah, OPEC Plus isn't rushing to the rescue. The Saudi Arabians have made crystal clear for months, even before the invasion, that the group doesn't plan to open up the oil taps anytime soon. Um, that iron resolve may or may not be cracking. However, in one confusing development this week, the United Arab Emirates ambassador to Washington had told that a news organization that the country wants to increase oil production, and they will encourage its partners in OPEC Plus to do the same. Um, But later, the United Arab Emirates Minister of Energy and Infrastructure tweeted that the nation will stick to its OPEC Plus agreement and they will gradually raise their production. And then the Iraqi oil um, ministry said its leaders met and agreed to its OPEC Plus partners, and it should balance supply and demand to stabilize the market. At this point, who the fuck knows what's going to happen? Um, and why can't U.S. oil companies ramp up production anyway? Russia was the number two oil producer in the world up until 2021, pumping out 9.7 million barrels a day, but the U.S. is number one with 10.2. American companies don't abide by those OPEC-style nationally mandated production targets, but U.S. oil producers can't or won't even fill in the supply gap. Even though they could make a mint given the high prices and demand. Again, here COVID strikes. Like many industries during the pandemic, oil producers are struggling to find staff and source the specialized equipment that we need. And meanwhile, U.S. oil companies are still smarting from the pain of that major oil bust in 2020, which kicked off a flurry of bankruptcies. Major oil companies' stock performances have lagged the broader market since then. And as the makers of fossil fuels, they're worried that the future environment policies could hurt um, our future demand for oil. Now all of the above underscores how oil and gas prices are tied to geopolitical events, the pandemic, drilling logistics, and so much more. And it adds up to the average U.S. gas prices, which are about 4.33 a gallon as of right now in certain areas. Now, in short, it's a simple case of supply and demand, but of course, it's never really simple for the Trump sycophants. So if you like the video, you can give the video a like and subscribe to my channel, RBW King. And you can also hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when a new video comes out. And if you want to support my work even further, you could donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the About section of YouTube to help further grow the channel and support it. So, yep.